Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Naked with Dr. Kate podcast. I'm Dr. Kate.
Hi, Dr. Kate.
That's so cheesy. And I'm here today with one of my absolute favorite guests, Tatiana Fogt, who is the host of the Bedside podcast and the doer of many wonderful, beautiful things. It's time to get naked with Dr. Kate. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Balestrieri, a Beverly Hills-based psychologist, certified sex therapist, and the founder of Modern Intimacy, a national therapy group. So let's dive into all things sex, relationships, mental health, and answer your questions with practical solutions and real answers. Each week, I'll share insights to help you build a healthy relationship with yourself, with other people, and with your sexuality. It's time to start thriving authentically. So let's get naked. And if you like this podcast, hit the download button so you never miss an episode. And don't forget to leave 5 stars and a review. I just absolutely adore the content that you post on social media. I have to tell you, it's super inspirational to me.
Thank you.
Yeah, your daily posts about pleasure and like your documentation of the pleasure practice that you have really has given me a lot of reflection in my own life. And I know you and I have talked offline about kind of what's been going on in our worlds, but last year was a really hard year for me. It was a lot. I did too many things. I burnt myself out a little bit, and I'm finally getting back to a place where I'm like investing in my own joy again, which is important. And your pleasure practice posts have been a part of what's been helping me do that. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm receiving that with so much love. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, that's a big reason why I wanted to talk to you today was about the pleasure practice, because it's not just me. Like, folks are burnt out, they're tired. And one of the first things that goes is fun, right? When we're really in that space of like, God, I am zapped. So how did you get to a place where you started emphasizing pleasure in the ways that you do? Like, what was your journey to this point?
That's a great question. And honestly, I just hard relate to you being like, last year was cuckoo bananas. That's the only way I can describe it.
Wait, hashtag cuckoo bananas. That's cuckoo bananas. Amazing.
I don't know if it's because, like, okay, if I really want to go deep with it, and like, I think that there was a part of us that when everybody went through lockdowns, everything went so quiet. And I think now we're in a space where, especially 2023, I felt myself being like, I'm getting back into it. I'm going, I'm doing. And so I think it was like, it was a bit of this cultural wave that I feel like I've noticed so many people going through. Like, okay, we hit this weird thing. Now we want to like put our foot on the gas pedal totally. So hard relate. Just, I am also like recalibrating myself, which I'll get more into. But yeah, I think the origins of the pleasure practice really started with me. Started when I was living in New York, I would say. I live in Los Angeles now, but when, I always describe New York is a great, amazing, lovely, lively city, but it's a hard city in the fact that like, it's not just hard in terms of getting by and getting your laundry done across the street 6 blocks away, or, carrying your groceries 18 miles because that's the closest, not actually 18 miles, but it feels.
Is New York even 18 miles long?
18 blocks or whatever. I'm just like, oh my God, these heavy bags. But it's like the concrete of it is hard too, right? And so I was in this space where I just felt just the hardness of everything. And I really needed to introduce this softness back in, almost this like where I see New York and a lot of city culture, I see it even in LA, it's this very like hyper masculine system of doing and the 24-hour go. I was looking for that feminine softness. I was just looking for a little bit of the relief. And so when I was living in New York, I kind of began being like, okay, well, how can I integrate a little bit more space for myself every day, right? Like my day was taken up by a million things that I think all of our days are taken up by: kids, obligations, work, showing up, right? And then we put ourselves in the last on the laundry list.
Right.
And that's where I found myself. I was like, I'm last on the laundry list and I don't even have kids, right? So I was like, all right, we gotta
You're putting imaginary kids before yourself.
Yeah,
Ouch.
imaginary Exactly. So I was like, we have to reorient this ship. And so I started playing with this idea of integrating what I've called pleasure practices into my day. And it was also my reclamation around what pleasure meant. I had the classic growing up experience that many of us did with like very limited sex ed, was a very curious individual, excited to explore, and was shut down a lot around it. And so I was kind of also reclaiming what it meant to find myself in spaces of pleasure and how I could expand that definition beyond just the bedroom, and how I could give myself that, you know, honestly, like even just like the orgasmic joy of living back into my life in small ways. And it's not the idea of, oh my gosh, I have to go take off a whole week and recalibrate, or I need an entire day at the spa, which I'm not saying those things aren't great, but it's not always realistic. So I was investigating ways that I could integrate pleasure into my life and what I see as almost micro moments that help kind of balance everything out.
I love that. And especially love how accessible and practical that is, because right, it is really daunting sometimes from a financial perspective or a time perspective to be like, oh, I'm going to go have a spa day or have a girls' weekend or take a vacation. Like, yeah, those things are all wonderful. And you can't do it every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So what are the other options when you don't have the big moments of pleasure and rest, right? And let's maybe differentiate a little bit. How do you sort of identify what feels like rest and what feels like pleasure? Or are they the same for you?
To me, rest falls into the category of what is in my pleasure toolkit. So I love this concept of constructing for yourself a toolkit that very much I kind of see ebbs and flows. It's not like this hard list that you follow all the time, but which we can go into in a bit. But to me, rest is in the category of my pleasure. It has different meaning at times, right? Like sometimes rest is just really needed for that restorative, like I need to rest. Other times it is a little bit more of like, it's going to kind of, you know, it's that maintenance, right? Like the deep rest versus kind of like the more, okay, how can I kind of take a quick power nap, keep going sort of, you know, hierarchy in the toolkit. But the idea of really creating a pleasure toolkit is so important in the sense that what are the things that you can go to and that you can rely on in those moments of, you know, still needing to show up, right? And that's not to say that sometimes, AKA this weekend, I've planned for myself because I've already kind of noticed myself going really hard, kind of back in that really doing energy. I'm realizing I need to recalibrate a bit. And so I am going to have a little bit more of that deeper rest. And that is one of the things in my toolkit that allows me just to reset, be like, okay, all right, we can get back into things.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. You know, I'm with you on the need for rest. And like also one of the things that's been really useful is planning those rest days ahead of time. Right. And really making it intentional. Like I know not this weekend, because this weekend I have a lot of stuff I have to do and be functional and productive around. But next weekend I'm planning a couch rot day.
Yes.
And I don't think I will shower. I will basically scuttle from the kitchen to the front door for my Postmates, and they're not paying for this episode, by the way, and back to the couch. Like that's it all day. And I need that so deeply. And there is like an immense amount of pleasure in saying no to things.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Let's talk about that for a second, because I have lived so much of my life being a yes woman. It's still something that is really, really hard for me. I was even on the phone the other day with someone and I like had to say no and caught myself being so wordy with it. I'm like, geez, just like just spit it out, right? And so I had so many excuses around it. And so, yeah, the pleasure of saying no can be so liberating. And for me, it was a big distinction of being like, I'm not shutting someone down. I'm not being cruel. I'm just putting a boundary up around my pleasure and around my peace and around my rest. Because if I continue being the yes woman, my life is for everybody else. It's not for myself.
Right.
And so I love what you mentioned about scheduling things in, because that has been a huge thing. If you find yourself in many of us find ourselves in a world where we are operating kind of off our calendars, we're in the cog of it all. The best way that you can integrate more of the feminine, and this is not me speaking on a binary, it's more me speaking in terms of masculine energetics is that doing system within all of us. Feminine energetics is that intuitive, knowing, pleasurable system that lives within all of us. So
I think about it as like an active and a passive. I try not to use that masculine, feminine language because a lot of folks really do then
they hook onto it.
Yeah, and it's hard sometimes to parse out like what does this mean in terms of people's gender versus an ideological concept. But I hear you.
I love that. Yeah. I love that. Yes.
Active, passive.
Active, passive. And so where can you, if you find yourself in the active system, how can you actually utilize that as a tool to get into your passive? And so can you actively plan ahead and be like, okay, I put time blocks in my calendar sometimes, an hour, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. I don't even plan what it is. I'm just like pleasure practice or whatever I want to call it, rest. And it's in that moment, I get to decide real time, oh, I really want to like take a nap for 15 minutes, or you know what, I'm going to squeeze in a quick movement practice of some sort. And so allowing myself the flexibility in real time, but having that scheduled bit in that gives myself that break, because sometimes, I found myself in situations where if it's not there, I'm just going to kind of find myself in just the doing mode.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to get lost in the doing mode, right? So much of our culture is based on what are we achieving and what have we done, what are we doing, and we stop being human beings then. And I think the pleasure practice is a way to get back to that being state. And this idea of active and passive really is a nice complement to our nervous systems, right? We have our nervous system that is a life force energy, right? Our sympathetic nervous system, and then our parasympathetic nervous system is down regulating. It's in charge of our rest. These two work in concert all the time, right? And so we do have those energies inherently in us, and it is so important to really think about how are you setting yourself up for that balance. And I think these like little micro moments are a great way to bring some restoration and balance to a day that otherwise feels kind of, too much.
Yes. And what I want to be the biggest takeaway from this conversation right now is I don't think I'm asking or we're asking anybody to, drop everything and live their lives like orgasming every minute of the day, right?
That would be great for like a few minutes, and then I think people would be like, what's next?
What's next?
Yeah. What else is here on the agenda?
Right. And so there is a beauty and something very realistic and a necessity to actually having both of these constructs live and flow and be balanced. I've been reading this book lately by Dr. Wallace J. Nichols called Blue Mind. And he talks about this concept of blue mind thinking and red mind thinking, and how most of red mind thinking is the stuff that gets you achieving your goals. It's what has allowed us to make the iPhone. It's what allowed us to progress and achieve and, fulfill the things that we're deeply passionate about fulfilling and seeing them through. So important. There's something so beautiful about that. Has our culture overemphasized it?
Yes.
Hell freaking yeah.
Yeah.
It's put us into gray mind thinking for many of us, which ends up being burnout. That total depletion where then we kind of enter modes of depression, anxiety. We lack passion. We lack creativity. The things that maybe gave us zest and enthusiasm are mute now. And so what is important to integrate back in, which is the pleasure practice, which is blue mind thinking, is giving yourself that space to just breathe and relax from it all. This book specifically talks about finding time to be in your blue mind, be in nature, be in water, have white space to just allow yourself to wander screenless, And so, I think it's really important that, we can utilize these practices, blue mind thinking, pleasure practices, being in our passive as a way to fuel some of also that red mind thinking as well. And that doing part that is still just equally as important. It's just coming a bit more into balance.
And that's really the key, right? When we are calibrated, we're in our best self space. It's so easy to get out of balance and lose your step, right? So pleasure practice. Wait, you have a pleasure toolkit. Is this like a caboodle or something? Like, would you carry it around with you, or is it more mental?
I wish, you know what I just thought of? Like in the 80s, or like early 90s, they had the like those makeup kits.
Yeah, the caboodle.
Is that what those are called?
Yes.
I didn't know what they were called.
They're like pink or blue, like the rounded edge.
Yes.
And yes, that's it. You open up the
back. With the little mirror in it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, this is what I imagine when you say your pleasure toolkit. Like, in here, you're like, rest is one compartment, maybe some raspberries that you enjoy over here. Like, what's in it?
Snacks.
Yeah.
All the things.
I'm totally going to get you a caboodle.
Wait, I need one. I want to personalize one. Like, bling it out. Pleasure practice.
So how do you, like, when you have this toolkit in your mind, is it in your mind? Is it a vision board? Like, how do you hold space for it so that it's a fluid thing, so you can add things to it, you can take things off of it, but like, what is the vehicle for that? How do you do it? What are some tips for people?
It's really all of the above. And I think a great place to begin is by actually acknowledging and unpacking what your current definition of pleasure is. Do you look at pleasure in just a sexual context? Do you look at it in a negative framework? Do you look at it as something frivolous? Or are you, do you have more of a holistic stance on it? Understanding its, role in our doing and being minds. And so just kind of almost like envision a scale for yourself. Like, where do you sit? And maybe you have a little bit of kind of unlearning to do and relearning and redefining to do around the word pleasure. I think a great place to begin when you want to start your pleasure toolkit and you're like, I have never done this before, is to look back on the things that brought you joy when you were a child. Really, or a teenager. What are the things that you used to get so lost in? Joy for the sake of joy, pleasure for the sake of pleasure. And I love going here because what's amazing, and I think specifically around kind of looking back at that time in your life, is that is when we are usually least programmed around how to properly be. And, kids are just these open portals of like energy and existence and experience. Yes. And so I love the idea of looking back at the things that brought you joy and what is that in the context of your adulthood. I'm not saying like you need to, go play with Play-Doh, but I'm saying,
but why not?
But maybe not. Yeah, why not? But for me, I was a kid who loved I loved doing arts and crafts, right? So what does that look like in my adult life, right? Like maybe it's like, maybe I am actually exploring, my creative mind and like going to get art materials. Maybe it's doing something in a digital space, right? Also for me, a big thing was I loved being active and playing outside. And a recent thing when I moved to LA a couple years ago was my rediscovery of, oh my God, I love playing tennis. I haven't picked up my tennis racket since I was 16, but I'm just going to try it and I'm going to try doing it again. And so exploring the things that used to bring you joy, bringing it into your adulthood context and whatever that might be or not be, and beginning kind of there. And I think from that point, I then keep a running list on my phone of just things that I know bring me joy. And they can be something as simple as, taking time to go get my favorite coffee from my coffee shop, to getting a movement practice in, to calling a friend. Oh my God, I love catching up with people who just know me to my freaking core. And so I keep that list on my phone and I use it as a resource, right? I just kind of like have this ongoing, like, what are the things that bring me joy? And also a big thing on that list is like, what are the things that I sometimes need to recalibrate my nervous system? Is it meditation practice? Is it, a weighted blanket? Is it just, knowing, like making my magnesium tea at night, right? And I know these things sound simple, you guys, but this is what is life force, and gifting yourself the opportunity to have this, and looking at it in a way of how can I like flirt with myself? How can I romanticize with myself? How can I bring pleasure and fulfillment to my life in this very moment? Oh my God, one of my favorite pleasure practices is on a weekly basis going to Trader Joe's and buying myself a fat bouquet of flowers. And I recently deciphered, I was like, this would be so much, this wouldn't even mean as much as it means to me, the way that I do it to myself, if someone even bought them for me.
Why is that?
I love the practice of going to the store, knowing that I'm going to like pick up my groceries, standing in front of all the colorful flowers, picking in the moment what colors stand out to me, what things I want to pair together, going home, putting them in, picking the vase, you know, arranging them, right? Like if someone were to give me the end result, I'd be like, oh, thank you. That was so thoughtful. And it would be meaningful and great, but there's fulfillment in that entire process that is just so soul.
Yeah. Well, it's all of your senses, right? And it's a movement practice at the same time. Like it's a really integrated mind-body experience. And it's like, to boil it down to a very reductionistic way of thinking about it, it's the journey that's important to you, not the destination.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's like so interconnected with sex too, right? Like,
yes.
Sure, I love a good orgasm. Everybody does. But it's like, can we enjoy the process of getting there is just as delicious.
Oh my gosh.
Sometimes more.
Sometimes more. Yeah.
Yeah, but oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just having a moment.
You're like, yeah, I do love a good foreplay.
I do, yeah. Let's talk a little bit for a second about this myth that people need to earn pleasure. How have you run into that in building your pleasure toolkit and a pleasure practice? How have you challenged it?
This goes really to the concept of desire, I think. I believe that many of us walk around this world either limiting our desires or being fearful of them. I am still privy to this, you know? It's something that I still work with. And I think, you know, there's, again, going to the concept of an end goal. Sometimes there's no, you know, perfect at the end of the day, but I just have awareness around it. And, you know, I could think of something as simple as, you know, maybe you have a desire to have a certain lifestyle, have a certain career, want something so badly. And I think sometimes when we want something so deeply, we can hide it from ourselves out of fear because we might not. What if it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
And so that is so real, and it can stop a lot of people in their tracks. And what I say to that is there is no thing that you will fail at. Anything is always just a redirection. I think Gabby Bernstein says this. It's a detour in the right direction. Enjoy the process of wherever it is you might want to go, because that end goal might not always be that stake in the road that you actually care about at the end of the day. Sometimes my desires have, you know, I've followed my desires really wanting something, and in that process been like, oh, you know what, I don't even care about the end goal anymore. Or like the post moved, or something else changed, the variable changed. And so I think it's really just a reframe around what it is and what it means to have the confidence to go after what you desire.
Yeah.
And like at your deepest core, what that means for you.
Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. I think you're right. Like desire does play a huge role, and the ways that we believe that we are worthy of those things can be such an impediment and an inhibiting factor in our willingness to go out and pursue something, because sometimes it's a little bit safer to never have tried than to try and be vulnerable and have it not go the way you hoped or wanted or needed it to go, right? Maybe you have limited resources to put toward something that you're doing, right? So we do have to sort of look at our risk benefit analysis and figure out how much oomph do we have to give something. But that's different than feeling unworthy, right? And I think sometimes because we do live in such an achievement-oriented society, you know, thanks internalized capitalism, we really forget that pleasure is something that we are born with the capacity to experience, and it is, in my opinion, a human right.
Yes.
Like we should all be able to feel pleasure, and I'm not just saying sexual pleasure, and that does not mean we are entitled to sex with another person. Not at all what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that feeling joy is something that's part of the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
And we are told that we have to do this, 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 and this, and then maybe you can have a moment of reprieve.
Yes.
But that is a trap, that is a myth. It's inherent in us. And so I think it's important to think about what kinds of pleasure can you really give yourself permission to really activate around and make super important, because it is something that is inherently human for you.
Yes. It's really, in this day and age, like a radical act to be someone to explore and to make time for it.
Yeah.
And like, guys, I work in this and I still feel all of the shame around it. And, you know, sometimes like I'll get the occasional like DM even from someone I know who's like kind of mocking me around it, right?
What?
It's happened to me like 2 or 3 times, like in the time that I've been doing it, and it's undertoned. It's not like an overt ha-ha, right? But I can tell that they haven't expanded themselves and their own, you know, investigated what it might mean for them to begin exploring something like this. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up, and hate that you've had that experience. It definitely is, I think, a depiction of how we have sort of conflated, again, worthiness with our ability to earn pleasure. We don't need to do that. But there's also a big piece around like the overcoupling of morality and pleasure. And a lot of folks have been given the message that it's immoral to seek out pleasure because it's selfish.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Yeah. And that's really hard to unlearn sometimes without really deep investigating within yourself and the why of why it's immoral.
Yeah.
So how have you gotten around that piece?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this up. You know what? The most selfless thing that you can do is be selfish. Because if we live our lives for everybody else, we are depleting ourselves the opportunity to live for ourselves. And when you reverse that, when you live for yourself, you can then have the energy, the resources, the capacity to be selfless.
Yes.
Right? So if we're not filling our own cup first, it's an end game. And I know all of us have felt it in some capacity. I mean, like if anyone's familiar, I'm sure all of us are with burning out, right? It's the idea of your cup has been overfilled, your plate is at max capacity, and you have been outsourcing more than you have been inputting. So I really believe that this is such a harmful narrative that, you know, culture's placed on us. Just this, you know, gold star, you did it for someone else, you are the martyr.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, I've grown up in households where it's the martyr, right? I've experienced on the other end how harmful that can be as someone who thinks it's totally selfless to give themselves up. You know, being on the opposite end of that, you're like, oh my God, if only you gave yourself a little bit more time.
Yeah. Right.
A little bit more, because then you would have actually been available.
Yes, right. I think like, I love what you're saying right there. It's like when we don't take the time to invest in our own pleasure, then what we're giving away is sort of like an empty shell version of ourselves.
It's a crumb.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's half-assed living.
Yeah.
And that is like everything I hope not to do, right? I want to live my life to the fullest. I want everybody to. And to be like pulling out of this wellspring that is within you. And knowing when to just chill out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and something you said earlier about pleasure being a form of like almost like it's a radical step, right, to be doing. And especially right now, you know, we live in an economy that's super hard for the majority of folks. And making sure, and this is the way that capitalism really like fucks with our pleasure, right? It says you don't get to rest, you don't get to have pleasure until you do XYZ or make so much money or have that next house that you want to buy, or a house or
yeah, now we're at a house, everyone.
Yeah, like anything. So we get in this sort of this ladder of like, I'm not able to live until, right? And so taking your power back and saying, no, I'm going to live right now is a form of activism. In fact, there's a really great book called Pleasure Activism. Yes. Is it Adrienne Marie Brown who wrote that book? Yeah. It's such an awesome read, and it really helps to like recalibrate pleasure as a form of radical self-love, radical other love, right? When you take care of yourself, and activism. Like fuck all of those restrictions.
Yes.
I'm going to have some joy right now.
Yep.
And that feels boldly empowering in the face of a system that tells you that you have to drain yourself before you can live.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, snaps all around.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and
thank
talking
you,
about
Kate.
your pleasure practice. Where can folks reach you if they want to learn more about how you kind of implement this every day in your life, or if they want to work with you in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So you can find me on Instagram at The Bedside, by The Bedside on TikTok, but most importantly, probably just The Bedside podcast.
Yeah.
Kate's been on a couple times, so go check out our episodes together. And I do have a really exciting kind of like pre-announcement. I'll tease it because I don't know if it'll be out by the time this episode comes out, but I've made an entire journal about how you can integrate pleasure practices into your everyday. And it kind of balances that active and passive energy we've been speaking about. It gives you the opportunity to kind of map that out for yourself every day, and find ways to just live your pleasure practices. So I'm really excited.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode, and I'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Get Naked with Dr. Kate. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Kate Balestrieri and on YouTube at Modern Intimacy. If you have questions you want answered on the podcast, feel free to email me at question@getnakedpodcast.com. Our Modern Intimacy team is here to help you and to provide you with support. Feel free to schedule a free 30-minute consultation at the link in our show notes. And don't forget to join our newsletter for insights, surveys, and articles sent directly to your inbox. You can sign up at modernintimacy.com/newsletter. New episodes drop every Tuesday. I'll see you next week. Disclaimer, this podcast is not a substitute for therapy and does not constitute a professional relationship with me, Dr. Kate, or with Modern Intimacy. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only.